G'day everyone and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video I'll be taking a look at the GHKs and giving you guys my first impressions on them. This isn't going to be a full-on review. For those I need at least 6 months to a year of actual gameplay before I can kind of give my real honest opinion. But I think I've got just enough time on my GHK AKs that I can at least give my initial thoughts on them, especially since I've had some issues come up and that I've had to solve. So I'll just chat about those really briefly. And then I'll show you the guns in action and talk about how they performed when I fielded them for the first time. So let's introduce the guns we're talking about today. But before that, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Heavy Recoil Club Discord server. If you're a fan of Gas Blowbacks, then be sure to check them out. And if you're a fan of this channel, make sure to leave a like on this video and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, so let's introduce the guns. First one is the AK74U and the second one is the AK74MN. So I've had these replicas for like 9 months and 6 months respectively, but for most of that time I've just been working on them, upgrading some of the internals, but also trying to fix some manufacturing defects. But I was only recently able to start fielding them, and I got a good day of gameplay on the 74MN and 2 days of nice CQB on the 74U. So I just want to start off by briefly discussing what my expectations were going into getting these GHKs and how that compared to the reality of owning them. Personally, I was really excited about owning a GHK. I'd heard a lot of positive things about them, and it seemed like they were the gas blowback manufacturer that was producing guns that were ready to go out of the box, that you could upgrade if you wanted, but you didn't really need to because they just worked. And since my gas blowback journey has been full of disappointment, I was really pumped to just get a gun that works. Because up until this point, there hasn't been a single GBBR other than my VFC MP7 that hasn't required some modification or upgrades or, just fixing quality control issues. This was very frustrating at the beginning of my journey since I didn't really have the skills to repair or modify or the tools that were needed to do that either. So suffice to say, I was pretty excited to just get a gas blowback that would work out of the box. And that was the reputation that I had heard about GHK. But spoiler alert, it didn't turn out to be the case, and it just turned out to be like any other gas blowback that was like 80% done, but needed the user to just get it that last 10-20%. And I'll go into detail on what went wrong and how I fixed it a bit later in the video. Okay, so what were my first impressions when I opened the box? The first thing I noticed was how beautiful they looked. LCT and GHK have really done a great job on these replicas. Obviously, they looked very different to what you're seeing now when I got them, and I really couldn't be stuffed getting them back to their original form, but I definitely would have kept them the way they looked when I got them. The reason I went for this more modern aesthetic was mostly for practical reasons. I needed places to mount cameras, etc. But I love the original AK looks, and I definitely would have kept them that way if I wasn't making videos for you guys. I especially love the wooden furniture on the 74U. So I was really happy to be able to keep some of that look with the B13 handguard, which hovers nicely over the original wooden furniture. Next, let's talk about performance. But before we dive into that, I'll just discuss briefly the upgrades I've done to these guns. I want to discuss the internal upgrades because obviously I've done a lot of work to the externals, but that's all furniture and pretty basic. So I did go ahead and replace the hop-up chamber and inner barrel on both of these guns for the Maple Leaf hop-up and barrel combo. I'm actually using the Crazy Jet barrels. On the 74MN, I replaced the recoil spring for a high-speed one. And on the AK74U, I installed the full travel kit from W&S, which is really, really awesome. So those are the only upgrades I've done to the internals, just so you guys know what we're working with. And now it's time to discuss performance and defects, which both guns have had, unfortunately. Let's start with the 74MN. When I went to check the FPS output of this replica, I noticed that the FPS was jumping all over the place. It was in between a range of 0.8 joule and 1.5, and the shots were changing really erratically. So you could have a shot be at 1.5, then go down to 0.8, and then back up to 1.4. So it was not making sense, and obviously something wasn't working right.
My 12 o'clock.
I was hoping though that the maple leaf hop-up chamber could fix that, because I suspected it had something to do with the loading nozzle not sealing properly with the hop-up. But after installing the maple leaf hop-up and the Crazy Jet barrel, it actually got worse. Now, I think that partially had to do with the wide bore Crazy Jet barrel, which reduced the FPS just overall, but there was still definitely something else at play. So I went ahead and disassembled the AK, and I was taking a look at how the outer barrel was connecting to the receiver. And what I saw was a little gap where it seemed that the outer barrel wasn't fully screwed into the receiver. So what I did was I went ahead and I tightened that up. I think it was one full revolution of the outer barrel, and that closed up that little gap that I saw. So then I took the gun to check it again on the chrono, and I noticed that the FPS had stabilized, which was really nice. Another issue that I had inadvertently fixed was that the hop-up chamber was sitting too far into the weapon, and that made it really, really difficult to rotate the wheel to adjust the hop-up. And that didn't feel right either. I mean, I literally had scraped off bits of this wheel with a hex key just trying to adjust the hop-up. And so what happened was when I pushed that barrel in, it pushed the hop-up chamber a little bit further out from the barrel, and now the hop-up wheel is smooth and I'm able to adjust it easily with my thumb. So that gave me also the impression that I had fixed something with the gun. So I went ahead and I did a bunch more testing, and everything looked like it was working really well. The weapon was shooting stably and the BBs were being hopped perfectly, so it seemed like everything was working as it should. But the whole time I was doing the test, I was doing it with the dust cover off. And when I went to just put that dust cover on and call it a day, what I noticed was that the rear sight block had been pushed also further by, like 0.5 millimeter. And so now the dust cover wouldn't slot in at the back. So at this point, it became clear that I would have to make modifications to the replica if I wanted to keep the barrel where it was, which I wasn't really comfortable with. So I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought there must be something else that I could do or that I haven't thought of doing that would fix it without me having to modify the actual replica. But after another day or two of trying alternative solutions, I just couldn't find anything that was both fixing the FPS instability and making the hop-up chamber sit nicely in the replica so that the wheel was easy to operate. So I decided to go back to that original fix, and what I did was I just dremeled off a small amount off the front end of my dust cover, and so now that fits perfectly. But it means any dust cover I do buy in the future will also have to be modified for it to fit. As for how it performed after those modifications, I took it out for a day of gameplay outdoor, and it performed flawlessly. It was shooting really nice, the range was awesome, and the BBs were flying perfectly straight. The weapon didn't have any malfunctions or jams or anything. So I have a feeling what I did actually fixed it, and yeah, I'm at least happy that I could have figured it out, but the fix was not a simple one and required actually dremeling the dust cover. So the manufacturing error that I think has happened here that's caused this is the notches that hold the rear sight block in place, I think are not where they should be, and they're off by 0.5 millimeter or 1 millimeter, so that when they went to screw in the barrel all the way, they weren't able to screw it in all the way and get the dust cover to fit, so they screwed it as far as it could go in, but that wasn't far enough into the weapon, and so the hop-up chamber was sitting too far forward and the nozzle wasn't sealing properly. Or at least that's my hypothesis on what went wrong with the manufacturing. If you guys out there who've got more experience on these GHK AKs have any other ideas, I'm totally open to hearing them. So make sure you put them in the comments. Alright, now moving on to the 74U. The 74U didn't have the same issue that the 74MN did. The FPS output was stable and the maple leaf hop-up chamber fit a lot better than the 74MN. So the hop-up wheel was a lot easier to rotate, but I did actually add an extra O-ring at the end of the chamber to just have it stick out a little bit further, and that made the hop-up wheel rotate a lot easier, and it also actually gave me a small bump in FPS and it stabilized the output a little bit more. So at this point, as far as I could tell, everything was working great and I was ready to take it to a skirm. The first time I actually took it out was to a tactical training day called Tactical Tuesdays. I thought it would be the perfect environment to try out my new replica and get more familiar with the AK, since it's a very low intensity type of event. So I was pretty disappointed when the AK74U just broke in the middle of that training day. As you can see in this video, what happens is the trigger goes dead and it feels like I've run out of ammo, but you'll see when I go for a reload that there are still BBs in the mags. So I'd go ahead and do a reload and hit the charging handle, and then when I went to pull the trigger, I would still get a dead trigger as if I had an empty magazine still.
Fuck! Ah, what is going on here? The gun's broken.
I can't tell you how disappointing this was. It had been months since I played and I'd had this replica for ages and I just couldn't wait to field it, and on the first day of actually fielding it breaks. So after this happened, I took a quick look inside the replica and I noticed that the firing pin and all the other parts next to it were shifted out of place, and that the pin that holds all of those parts could be pulled out of the replica with ease. So I realized that the E-clip that held that all in place had fallen out. Don't ask me how this happened or when this happened. The fact that it happened at all is a bit of a disgrace, in my opinion. So I went ahead and ordered a replacement E-clip and fixed that. And it seems to be working fine now, but only a couple of days later, something else broke and the gun was dead again. This time it was a tiny spring that attaches to the firing pin, and this thing is so flimsy, the hoop at the end of it just snapped off. Honestly, the first time I saw this spring, I was shocked. I mean, I could tell that it was going to break from the moment that I saw it. The funny thing is, I'd actually ordered a bunch of spare parts from Simoon when I ordered that E-clip. And what I did was I took a look inside the gun and I tried to find everything that looked fragile and that could break. And this spring was at the top of the list. So I had actually ordered 4 of those. And then a couple of days after I ordered them, it breaks. So it was like just really funny that that would happen. All right, so now that we've sorted all that out, how do the guns perform after these fixes?
They don't know I'm behind them.
Like I said earlier, I haven't had that much time on these replicas and I would need a little bit more before I could give like my final opinion. But so far, I've got to say I've been having a blast with them.
I've got 2, there's 1 more.
They're both shooting straight and reliably now. I haven't had any other malfunctions happen since both fixes. The 74U is insanely fun to play with. The full travel kit from W&S just really takes the recoil to a whole nother level. And the sound of the steel bolt and the steel hammer that you install with it, they really elevate the realism of the sound as well, which is a really important part in my opinion. That being said though, it does come at the cost of performance. The weapon takes a lot more time to cycle, so your rate of fire is a lot lower, and the weapon is also a lot less gas efficient. But for CQB, which is where I plan to be using the 74U mostly, I don't think that performance hit really makes a huge difference, and the extra kick and the sound really adds to the enjoyment. So for CQB, I'm more than happy to have this heavy bolt. But I've kept the AK74 with the stock bolt and with a heavier recoil spring so that I can just have a way snappier and faster weapon outdoor. So in conclusion, I love my GHK AKs. Even with all the issues that I've had with them, I don't regret buying them. But I do have to say that the reputation that GHK has for making the best GBBRs might not be merited. Maybe that was the case a few years ago before I got into airsoft, but as far as I can tell, they're on par with the VFCs. So I don't know if you can justify the price difference between GHKs and VFC and WE, but I haven't had my GHK AKs for very long, and I don't want to make any definitive statements about how I feel toward them. It could be that in a couple of years, their longevity proves that the price actually makes sense. But until I've actually put them through their paces, it's hard for me to say. But I'll definitely make sure to do a full in-depth review once I've got enough time on the guns. That's it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful. And please let me know in the comments if you have any ideas or suggestions. I'm still new to the GHK platform, and I'm sure there are people out there that know a lot more than I do. If you feel I got something wrong, definitely let me know in the comments. And make sure to hit subscribe and the bell button if you guys want to be notified when more GHK AK content comes out. I've also got a bunch of really cool guns that I'm waiting to field. So there should be a lot of really cool content coming up in the next few months. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you on the next one.